Cool. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump into my lightning talk. We'll skip that icebreaker. So who I am a former high school science educator. I ran a makerspace and I was a science team coach. So a bunch of different things at high school level mostly. And then now I'm here at MSU facilitating professional development for the Science Math Resource Center. But I'm also a current doctoral candidate at Johns Hopkins, hoping to defend in June, actually, with an emphasis on mind, brain, and teaching. So my background is in neuroscience, and I wanted to know more about this topic of neuroeducation and how we can apply the brain to understanding the classroom experience. So my research interests are really in science education and understanding these opportunity gaps that exist in science achievement by both gender and ethnicity. Um, I actually I look at two different systems. So I look at a teacher level microsystem and a student level microsystem and how they interact. So teacher level microsystem, thinking about how teachers view students and their abilities, and what barriers they report to evidence-based practices. The student level microsystem, I'm really interested in affective measures like identity, self-efficacy, and sense of belonging. A consideration of prior experiences like course taking or prior experiences even within classrooms or outside of classrooms, like what we see in the media, and then family dynamics, family support, and things like that. And these two microsystems come together at the classroom level. And so thinking about what sort of student perceptions are there of the classroom, what kind of student-teacher interactions exist. And so that's really kind of how I conceptualize what I'm considering with regards to student achievement. And in an initial kind of assessment of the problem, I was looking at a case study, one particular school site in Southern California. There is an opportunity gap with regards to science achievement in student course taking and performance on the statewide test. This is a large public charter school, and there are significant differences in both course taking and um, uh, performance. So I looked then at like how do the teachers approach classroom instruction, and it turns out that teachers have inconsistent definitions of student STEM identity, and they struggle with identifying very specific methods to develop that identity. They also view students as barriers to implementing evidence-based instructional practices, particularly in that students are not prepared to engage in active learning. So this kind of provided me a greater understanding of the problem at this particular research site and enabled me to design an intervention. So I designed that intervention really with the goal of targeting two ideas explicitly, which are authentic inquiry and STEM identity. Now, STEM identity is really how you see yourself as a person. I used a particular model where there's three dimensions of identity. And then I used authentic inquiry, also happened to have a three-dimensional model of inquiry. And authenticity was really based on the likelihood of the practices of the inquiry being employed in a scientific space, and the meaningfulness to the learners and others. And so those were presented really the focus of the intervention. And I provided an example of the authentic experience and demonstrated the research basis for the use of authentic inquiry in promoting identity development for marginalized learners. So my intervention was a case study intervention, and I really focused on these two key constructs or key ideas and how they could be leveraged to support marginalized learners. And these were my outcomes. This is a little outcome map. So I designed that professional development, and it led to an increase in teacher knowledge of the two key constructs, which then actually also led to an increase in knowledge of how authentic inquiry can be leveraged to develop identity. The really interesting thing was that this also increase teacher use of identity supporting practices in the classroom. So pre and post intervention, I did classroom observations, and some of the biggest changes were in classroom discourse and teacher questioning strategies. So the student experience really did change in the classroom because the teacher, their instructional practices changed. And although measuring student identity directly was not in the scope of the current work, um, those are predicted to be ultimately the outcomes is that first, by changing your use of authentic inquiry and making your inquiry practices more authentic, that's going to engage students in identity development. And that will hopefully impact the courses they take, which will then impact achievement. So that's really the map of my outcomes. I was able to track changes in teacher practices, but I wasn't quite able to track the changes in student identity and course taking. But the teacher actually did mention effects that they think are happening in their classroom. So interestingly, indirect measurements of students, but definitely was able to measure some direct things about students as well. So that's